you should constantly be trying to build the company today that you want to be tomorrow. The greatest business people that normally that you see are the ones that are very able to kind of recognize the way they feel, put that on hold for a moment, and then say like, but this is actually the commercial reality, and then obviously make the decision that makes the best sense for the business. I think being able to elevate the way that you think constantly is a mandatory requirement for people that want to have continued and scaled success.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of the Make It Happen show. I'm Tim Morris, the CEO at The Entourage, and today I'm joined again by Toby Pearce, the co-founder of Sweat. So we've had Toby on before and it was a great episode. It was actually one of our most popular episodes. I interviewed him again for our Unconvention event and we just covered completely different ground than the last conversation. So I really wanted to share this interview with you. There's so many great lessons from Toby. He's taken a business from nothing to astronomical levels. So, if you want to be on that kind of journey as well, this is the episode for you. Let's get into it. Toby Pearce, so good to have you here as part of Unconvention. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing awesome, man. Thank you so much for inviting me along to have a chat.
Yeah, no, it's really great. I'm looking forward to hearing your journey and some of the lessons that you've learned. Talking about the journey, what a journey. You've gone from being a PT to having a wildly successful app. I think you've got a community of 50 million now. So the theme for the event today is about unconventional thinking, right? So all of us in business, we're trying to do innovative things. We're trying to break new ground. You guys certainly have. What have been some of the unconventional things that you've done along the journey?
Yeah, if you were running an organization and you were making, I don't know, 20-25 million dollars a year and a really, really big, healthy bottom line as well, then normally that would not be a stimulus for change, right? Like most business owners, that took 2 years, 2 odd years to build. Most founders and business owners would be thinking about either, growing that the way it is, or, frankly, just surviving it and keeping it for as long as possible.
Mhm.
Um, we got to that point selling ebooks. Yeah, we were doing a really, really good job selling ebooks, and then I had this fantastic idea to invest millions of dollars of our of our hard earned profit back into the business to build an app which we had absolutely no idea about. And it was kind of like an unprompted pivot, if you want to think of it that way, in the sense that most organizations are typically speaking pivoting under duress.
Mhm.
Something's gone wrong, or they see that they're about to kind of run into a brick wall, or a new competitor's stolen a huge portion of their market share. So they're like, oh, let's pivot and change. Whereas I like to think, and this story is kind of a good example in the sense that if you wait to pivot when something's gone wrong, you've probably waited too long. So I think on the theme of you know unconventional thinking, like, it seems logical, but it's not actually that common that organizations are constantly looking ahead to try to get ahead of the next trend,
Yeah.
rather than reacting to the current trend kind of dying.
Yeah. Well, I think that's almost the innovator's dilemma there, right? If you've got a great successful business and you're coming up with a new idea that
Yeah.
might, surpass the old business, that's for a lot of people, it's probably a hard decision to make. But you
Mm.
guys have clearly made that leap a couple of times. You are a business
Yeah.
that has innovated along the journey. One of the things I love that you guys did was you hear so many businesses are going to be like, we're going to be the Uber for X, or we're going to be the Netflix for this, and I think I think you guys actually managed to do that, like the Netflix for fitness. You actually managed to stake that claim in the ground and achieve it. What were some of the strategies behind that? Why did you get so far along that journey and others haven't?
The way I like to think about that really is, you should constantly be trying to build the company today that you want to be tomorrow, right? And if you think about this through the lens, if you step away from being a first time founder and kind of just go, if you're a general long term business person over many cycles of business, what would that statement mean to you, and how would it be different? And to me, very early on, I said, well, what is the business I want to be tomorrow? And my goal was like, oh well, we have our organizational vision and mission. We're here to empower women with fitness, and we want to do that in the best way possible. And I was like, well, how would you define an organization that is doing that better than anybody else, or at least that is in the top tier of organizations in the world? And well, the way I looked at that was, I'm like, well, you're building an organization of value, And if the organization is of value, somebody will want to buy the organization. Yeah, which then kind of led me to this thought of, well, the organization of tomorrow, or next month or next year, is actually an organization that could be bought. And so
Mhm.
if I was going to be a buyer buying our company, how would I design it to be the most appealing organization possible to buy? And so that like process of thinking, led to the identification of a huge amount of risk, frankly, that we needed to address. So early on, like was ebooks, what was selling ebooks going to last 5 or 10 years? No, no way. The technology was going to outpace us. The culture of media in general was going to outpace us. So we had to address that.
Mhm.
Was having the single best personal trainer, Kayla, in the world with the largest following and all these sorts of things, was that actually going to be a business that somebody wanted to buy? Well, yes and no. No, in the sense that you've just got a talent representation of key man risk. So how do we address the key man risk? How do we
Mhm.
address the branding risk?
Mhm.
And so as we kind of went through this, to try to put the puzzle together, the key philosophy there really was, how do we design an organization that everybody would want to buy if they were trying to get into this space? And that was basically what we used to lead the strategy.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. I was maybe going to touch on this later on, but it's a perfect time to talk about it. I mean, you recently did sell the business to iFit, a huge American business. So that planning that you did and that thinking about building the business of the future really paid off.
As an individual, I'm just quite passionate about business in general. So it was in many ways the perfect kind of playground, if you will, for me to kind of go through the learning journey. So I mean, I loved that part of it, but it was definitely a very challenging process. But as you mentioned, we were able to get a decent outcome in the end. So
Nice. Well done. Well done. And most of the people that we have online
yeah,
today are trying to take that next step up. Like they're at 6 figures, they want to get to
yeah,
seven. And they get there and they realize this is a very, very different business to what it was a couple of years ago. I think an
yeah,
area it might be good to touch on with you guys, you've now really built a business that does run largely without you. You've just put a CEO in place. Uh,
yeah.
I'm sure it took a lot of work to get there. How has that journey been for you? Sort of like, I suppose, letting go of a bit of the control of your baby and then trusting it in
Mm.
someone else's hands. How's it been?
Yeah, yeah. Look, so if you had have asked me throughout the journey at any given point in time, I would have given you very mixed, a very mixed response to that question. They're obviously just the highs and lows of business. Work on your business, not in your business. And that's for a lot of people. I mentor some founders, and a lot of the people I work with, and that sounds a bit more like a dream, than
Yeah.
it actually does reality. And even if you're able to kind of live in the dream for a while, it's a very it's a big series of quite confronting realities that come to you, and it's this notion of like you've got to let go of control, as you mentioned. In some cases, your expectations may need to shift. And
Mm.
so the process, if you had to simplify kind of what's going on there, it really is a process of concentrating on what matters. You really get super, super tight at figuring out like what actually matters. What are the things that only I can do that nobody
Mm.
else can do? Get rid of everything else that you're doing and just focus on those. And then when you've got to the point where you're focusing on those, then figure out how you can train people to do it better than you can, or find people that can do it better than you can. Because again, coming back to the baseline here, or the the pillar to which we attach the strategy. What does an organization look like if it's like ready to be bought or perfect to be bought?
Yeah. I think there's a big challenge for business owners going along that journey though. So they hear, yeah, okay, I've got to let go, I've got to delegate, I've got to bring people in. And seeing so many entrepreneurs go along this journey, they really do have to force themselves to do it. And it is a slow, slow game. How did you push yourself along that? Was it the focus on the strategy? Did that get you all the way through? Or did you have to like sit yourself down a couple of times and be like, Toby, like we've got to do this? How did you do it?
Yeah, yeah. In my experience, being in the business, and running organization, and also working with a lot of founders, I think one really awesome area to focus on, not just in this topic, but in a variety of topics, is really like how ready are you actually for change? And it sounds really um kind of vanilla, and almost a little bit abstract, but it's like really, if you actually think about it, like if you had to give yourself a score for change readiness, generally speaking, what would it be? And normally, what actually ends up happening is that people, they logically like the idea of working on the business, not working in it, but it's actually a really big change. And I mean, change sucks for people in general. Most people don't really like change. They avoid it. They move away from it. And so if you're not ready for that, the emotional confrontation is actually too big, to lean into. And so most of the process of kind of stepping away from the day to day really comes down to like, how ready are you to change, which is really an emotional conversation, of course. And then how good are you? How good are you at leveraging people in your team?
Mm.
How good are you at managing and working with other people? Because ultimately, if you're getting rid of some work, the work's got to go to other people more often than not. Which means that you're relying on others to deliver. So if you're not ready for that, and you're not really good at working with people for that, you're going to get very challenged very quickly.
Yeah, and I think it's as you bring on people into the business to take some of that responsibility, the types of people you need, like the level of people that you need evolves. It changes. Like when you are a startup and there's only a
Yeah,
couple of you and you're paying startup wages and it's all hopes and dreams, that's a hard group of
yeah,
people to delegate to. But then as you get into like this scale stage
yeah.
business, you got to start bringing on some really experienced people.
Yeah, like that's a big problem. Like I mean, how many times do you see people trying to grow a business and they try to bring in that next level of talent, but they recruit too low. They recruit, not quite experienced enough or too junior. And so they're, conceptually they're doing the right thing. They're bringing in people and they're trying to palm off their tasks. But because they're kind of, normally, not to generalize, but normally they don't want to invest in advance. So they're like, oh, I don't have 200K. Maybe I'll try to get someone at 120K. It's like, well, but how are you doing the maths? Is your time going to make 80 grand more next year if you're contributing only on the business versus in? Well,
Yeah.
you'll make 10x that, maybe 20x that.
Yeah.
But people often again, they're not actually truly ready for the change. They haven't truly committed. And as a result of that, they kind of trip over their own feet. And just to be clear, I did this for years. I probably did this for 2 or 3 years straight. And nothing, kind of upset me more because I was like, am I just doing everything wrong? Like, what am I missing here? I'm like, the logic is quite simple. I was like, something is falling over, and, getting the right, I mean, everyone says get the right bum on the right seat, so to speak, but it's so much more detailed than that. It's so much more layered and multifaceted, to get it right. So I think that's something that I see happen a lot.
That's awesome. That is like such a hard learned lesson. It is a conversation I have with business owners all the time. It's like you got to make that investment. You got to make that leap to that, COO, GM, or something like that. And one of the ways that I advocate is to have a really good, strategy and forecast, right? Then the numbers will show you. But I think actually what you mentioned there is probably a simpler way to look at it. It's like, if you can bring this person on that will take off X, Y, and Z from your plate, what are you going to be able to achieve? And is that worth more than this investment you're looking to make? Okay, if those simple numbers stack up, then steel yourself and make the leap.
Yeah. It's all about backing yourself at the end of the day, right? And I think, I mean, again, kind of coming back to that change readiness thing. I mean, human beings in a general sense, ultimately we're here to preserve ourselves, right? We want to keep ourselves safe, and unfortunately, none of those default behavioral mechanisms really, or most of them, don't necessarily support growing a business because when you're growing a business, it's constantly, you're pretty much constantly uncomfortable. You're constantly dealing with stress and pressure, and a lot of the times if you try to emotionally kind of rationalize or make sense of that, that's not necessarily going to reconcile with the commercial world. And so it ends up, there's a really big kind of internal debate you see people go through all the time. I mean, I have been through it and I continue to go through it, right? But it's the greatest business people that normally that you see are the ones that are very able to kind of recognize the way they feel, put that on hold for a moment, and then say like, but this is actually the commercial reality, and then obviously make the decision that makes the best sense for the business.
Hi there, Tim jumping in here quickly to say, if you're enjoying this episode, our team at The Entourage has plenty more for you to sink your teeth into. We not only publish a new episode every week, plus the full video on YouTube, we also have heaps of resources and tools on our website available to help you build and scale an impactful business. You can find the link to all of this in our About section. Also, so you never miss any of the insights and strategies from our guests, Don't forget to subscribe to learn more each week. Now, let's get back to the show. You touched on actually through there about you've done some mentoring of business owners coming up. I'm actually really interested in kind of the flip side of that and any mentors that you had along the journey or massive supporters, people that were just like really, really cheering you on. Who are some of those people?
The thing for me personally, and it's just different for everybody, but I probably struggled less with what is the right business decision to make and how does this commercially make sense. Like to me, I actually found that to be I didn't find those things to be the hardest to deal with. I actually found the emotional side of business to be a lot harder. And so
Mm,
later in my career, trying to think, probably nearly 5 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I started working with um, a business coach who was actually a psychologist. So very very knowledgeable in business. But the actual core competency that I was after was like, how do I improve the way that I think and how do I navigate how I feel? Because I was
mm,
getting much more overwhelmed with the emotions, than I was getting overwhelmed with, is this data right, or is the strategy good, like it was more, you know, dealing with the stress and pressure, if you've got how do you emotionally navigate terminating the employment with someone who is an amazing human being, but just not the right person for your business. Like these are the emotional challenges that I found to be infinitely more difficult. And so for me, getting a business coach who was very deep in psychology, like that to me was absolutely not only game changing for business, but I think life changing in general. Like it completely
mm.
changed my outlook and made me much more effective.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think that's because, I mean, you are a very commercially minded person. We've talked before about how you kind of like lay out your strategy, you gather the data, and you execute on it really, really well. And maybe the emotional side was all new for you. What are some of the key bits of advice or key like building blocks you help some of the younger generation put in place? Like when you're providing them advice, what do you help them work on?
I think the notion of being able to communicate effectively, and one area of that obviously is kind of you know giving and receiving feedback. I think more in my opinion, more business value is probably lost by what's not said, than by
Mm,
what is said and wrong decisions being made, if that makes sense. Normally the right answer is in the room, but people are too afraid to comment, or they're too afraid to provide feedback. Whether it to be to a senior or one of their colleagues. And so I think being able to build the confidence to receive feedback and very importantly be able to give feedback and create the environment to do that. I think for everyone is just it's a really big, and in my opinion, really undervalued skill. I think that building business knowledge is actually, in my opinion, a lot easier because it's can be a little bit more binary. It's kind of right or wrong. Finance, data, tech, all that. That is quite straightforward to learn. It just takes a lot of time, but the soft skills are much more emotional to deal with. Like, oh, okay, I've got some feedback. It's constructive feedback, but how do I approach this conversation and how do I deliver it so that they get it and so that I'm not attacking them? Like all that sort of stuff. Like I think for anyone at the beginning of their career, I don't think that you can be good enough at that. Like I think it's a skill that needs to be continually refined and practiced.
yeah. Well, because it can just go sideways so often. Like, you go into a product development meeting and it's all about like the tech roadmap. It's all pretty black and white. As you
Yeah.
say, you go into like a feedback or a personal development session with one of your team and it could go in ways that you didn't even think it was going to go.
It's a really big cultural thing, right? As well. Like, I mean, you can be the greatest person in the world at giving feedback, but if you've built a culture of abrasiveness and closed mindedness, it's like that's never gonna win either. So I think, I mean, it's obviously it's all quite multifaceted and complex, but I mean, if you can find a way to give feedback effectively and continue to perpetuate a culture of openness, and learning, like I think it's a big win.
Awesome. So we've got a lot of, as I said before, businesses trying to go to that next level, right? Listening today, they're at six figures trying to get a seven or seven or eight or beyond. They're all got some different challenges, but what would be some of your key bits of advice for a business owner trying to take that next step?
Yeah, well, one of the things that shines through a lot, as you kind of go from one level of business to another, is that your thinking is constantly changing. I mean, there's a variety of like quotes and anecdotes here, and I normally don't like to kind of lean into them too much, but one of them is that what got you here won't get you there, right? And so as you think about
Mm,
that, I mean, I actually remember intimately having a conversation about this probably nearly 5 years ago now with one of the really great investment funds in Australia, and we were just talking about their perspective on founders and management teams to do this. And it's a really it's a really kind of well understood notion that what's going to build a business that makes $1 million a year is probably going to be quite different to making 10 million a year, and what makes 10 is probably going to be different to 50, and 50 will be different to 100, and 100 will be different to 500. And obviously the thinking kind of follows similar principles, but I think like over time finding ways to evolve the way that you think, and as strange as this might sound, kind of checking that the way that you think is actually right. Like, are you actually thinking about things and thinking about your business the right way is a really, in my opinion, a really big deal, because the thinking spans across all areas of business. It's not just like, I need to learn how to read a P&L better, or how do I interpret this data, or, like, did I write the, position description right? They're skills you need as well, of course. But I think being able to, elevate the way that you think constantly is a mandatory requirement for people that want to have continued and scaled success. But I don't think it's actually focused on, that much. So I definitely suggest, that's a skill that everyone, in their business journey should develop. Whether you're a founder or an employee, it doesn't really matter. If you want to continue to improve, you need to improve the way you think.
Yeah. And it's actually super important that you've like focused in on that, because what I see all the time is founder or business owner or anyone in the business, they kind of get to the point of the limitation of their current thinking, and it's not really working. And so they just go back to their comfort zone. They go back to how they were doing it, and it's just exacerbating the problem. So it's like identifying, okay, if you're hitting a limit, you got to shift your thinking, evolve your thinking, and go to the next level.
Yeah, and you see it. You see it all the time. You see it all the time, right? And like opening. I mean, a great example is like opening and running one cafe has a series of problems. And then if you were to, you were doing really well, so you went and opened, cafe number 2 and cafe number 3. Now you have a completely different set of problems. You're talking about scalable management, like quality control, across multiple sites, right? And then if you said, well, I want to open 300 and I want to do it across the country, you have a whole different set of problems now. Maybe you're using a different business model. You have a whole bunch, you have to have a really aggressive retail and property strategy, like things that you've not really had before. And then if you wanted to internationalize, you've got a variety of, different problems again. And so, constantly checking the way that you're thinking. There's only one example, of course, but, constantly kind of checking your thinking is really going to provide a critical view of whether or not you're actually thinking the way that your business needs, or you're just thinking the way that you feel is necessary because it's safe for you.
Yeah, that's a great example. If anyone's in the audience with 2 cafes at the moment and you're thinking going national and international, I want to hear the challenges that you experienced along the way. Toby Pearce, really great to have you involved in Uncon. Such great advice. I love hearing the story every time we talk through it. We dig into a new area. So thank you very much for being part of Uncon. Cheers.
Thanks, mate. Thank you so much. It's always great to catch up and chat, and really hope that everyone listening in today was able to get some great value from that.
Great. Thanks for tuning in to the Make It Happen show, brought to you by our team at The Entourage, Australia's leading business coaching and training provider. We're on a mission to empower entrepreneurs by giving them everything they need to build great businesses and live meaningful lives. If you got something out of this episode, picked up a great takeaway, or just want to say hi, don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes or let us know at The Entourage Official on all social platforms. We'd love to hear from you. Catch you in the next episode with our next guest right here. Bye for now.